and that's why they end up going to actual like illegal drug dealers to get these medications and things, because they feel like, well, they're not helping me out. They know sometimes they even prescribe you the wrong thing and they get you hooked on it. So let's start off with the first question is, what is prohibition and why did it start?
Not in this hand. This is not prohibition right here,
Brett, Brett, where do you think I'm at?
and it is definitely
Anyway.
in this hand.
Exactly. So, prohibition refers to a period between 1920 and 1933 where the production, sale, and transport of alcoholic beverages were banned across the United States. This era began with the passage of the 18th Amendment in the Volstead Act, which enforced the ban. It was largely the result of a growing temperance movement in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, led by religious groups, moral reformers, and organizations like the Anti-Saloon League. These groups viewed alcohol as corrupting force that contributed to domestic abuse, crime, and poverty, and decline in moral values. So the first one I'm going to pull up here. Let's see. All right, so this is the temperance movement. The temperance movement is a social movement promoting temperance and complete abstinence from consumption of alcohol beverages. Participants in the movement typically criticize alcohol intoxication or promote what's that?
Teetotalers.
Teetotalers.
Teetotalism.
That's what that's what I'm going to call it from here on out. And its leaders emphasize alcohol's negative effects on people's health, personalities, and family lives. Typically, the movement promotes alcohol education. It also demands the passage of new laws against the sale of alcohol, either regulations and availability of alcohol or complete prohibition of it. How did that last?
I mean, we did get things like moonshine, all the high octane alcohols were developed during that time. So, the whiskeys and the vodkas and a lot of that stuff really they could move it. See, this is 5%, but when you go get a bottle of whiskey, like a case of these will last a whole month. You have to drink way more of these. It's all distilled. It's hard to carry a lot of this, right? But if you go get a bottle of whiskey that's like that big, it's got as much alcohol in it as a whole case of beer or something like that. So what they did was, we'll just make all the alcohol and then we'll condense it way down. And it was supposed to be then mixed. Like Mountain Dew, the origin of Mountain Dew, it was to be mixed with moonshine. It was a mixer for that purpose. So
there's no way. Are you serious?
Yeah.
Ask the internet, I guess.
so you end up, it was a matter of logistics. How do you get alcohol from one place to another without getting caught? Well, you want to condense it as much as you can. And then, so a lot of those mixers and that whole industry, a lot of ideas came out of Prohibition when it finally opened back up again. That's when you know.
Oh, everything worked out. Yeah. So this is from, this is Carrie Nation. Roma Nation, Carrie Nation. Hey, let's go. Caroline Amelia Nation, often referred to as Carrie Nation, Carrie A Nation, okay, blah, 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 was a American who was a radical member of the temperance movement who opposed alcohol before the advent of Prohibition. Nation is noted for attacking alcohol serving establishments with a hatchet. Oh, she's badass. She married David Nation in 1874. She was previously known as either by her birth name of Carrie Moore and her first marriage in 1867 as Carrie Gloyd. Nation was known as Mother Nation for the charity and religious work she did. Like many of the temperance movement, she considered drunkenness a cause of many society's problems, which it probably still is, but I digress. She attempted she attempted to help people in prison. In 1890, Nation founded a sewing circle in Medicine Lodge, Kansas, to make clothing for the poor as well as prepare meals on the holidays, Thanksgiving and Christmas. In 1901, Nation established a shelter for wives and children of alcoholics in Kansas City, Missouri. The shelter would later be described as an early model for today's battered women's shelter. All right, so obviously back then there wasn't social media and cameras and stuff to see what was going on back then. But I'm pretty sure there was a lot of alcoholics. What do you think?
Well, I mean, we did. She went right from Civil War to like, let's just cut all the shackles off of everybody. That's not enough. Let's get rid of the alcoholism and everything. 1860s. That's like that's kind of an amazing feat. It's like you're gonna go right into right into activism. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly.
Reconstruction era and all of that.
Yeah, there she is with her little hatchet. Yeah, look at this. So I'm guessing this is
Wow.
from in front of her. These are old pictures. These are pictures from like the 1800s or like the late 1800s. I'm surprised that they're preserved as much as they are. But the key motives behind the prohibition was moral reform. Advocates believed that alcohol was the root of many of societal problems, domestic violence, and economic instability. The economic factors during World War One is that there was a push to conserve grain for food production rather than alcohol distillation, even though we had grain all over the place. And then social order, prohibition was viewed as like viewed as a way to a cleanse society, with alcohol often associated with working class and immigrant communities who were viewed as with suspicion of mainstream America. But now we have beer and alcohol ads all over the place.
What's your take on the alcohol thing, Zaza? Just in general, because there's a wide variety. I mean, you got because there's the Catholics that are like, yeah, cool, we're good with it all the way, and then there's kind of like some of the middle of the ground Protestants. There's like, yeah, only at communion, maybe a beer or something, and then you got like the Baptists where two Baptists can't go fishing together. You have to take two Baptists fishing, otherwise, they'll get they'll drink all the beer. So
Really?
because
I've
it's
never
a
heard that
joke.
before.
It's
I
a
never heard
joke.
that.
It's a joke
We're
because
learning a whole bunch of new stuff here on
Right.
Revelation.
it's a joke. It's a joke because two Baptists don't want to admit that that they drink for fear of like you don't want to cause your brother to stumble, so you just don't drink in front of the other
Right.
Baptist. So like if you take one, you got to take two. That way they don't drink the beer.
Hmm.
Anyway,
Well,
we're like
well,
there's a scale of like nothing
yeah.
to something.
Mhm.
I feel like when it comes to alcohol, people are, as we've seen with the whole prohibition era, people are going to make alcohol if they want to drink it. That's the bottom
Right.
line. And
Exactly.
so it's like when it comes to the government stepping in, is like, well, what's the government's motivation for stepping in and making something illegal? Is it for the
Control.
better good? Right. Or is it for control? And when it comes to things like that, it's like when you give them an inch, they're gonna take a mile. So, my
Hmm.
thoughts are, just don't allow the government to control small things because they're just gonna overstep their boundaries, as we've seen
Yep.
time and time again.
Exactly. You give them an inch, they really want to be a ruler.
Yeah.
Hey!
Ooh, zinger.
Zingers all
Bingo.
day. Bingo.
Oh, I'm being called out. That's plagiarism. Yes,
You told-
Brian told me that joke. He tells it better than I do.
He really
Yeah.
does. He really does. But yeah, so the second part is, why did prohibition end? It ended on December 5th, 1933. An amendment which repealed the 18th Amendment. Several factors contributed to its failure and eventual repeal. The ineffectiveness, despite the ban, illegal alcohol production and consumption thrived. Organized crime syndicates, such as led by figures like Al Capone. I'm pretty sure that's a name that everybody knows here.
Yeah.
Let's see. I thought I had that photo up, but I don't. He profited immensely from the black market trade of alcohol. I mean, wasn't there Didn't the Rockefellers do the same thing?
I'm not sure. I wouldn't be surprised. I know. Industries like NASCAR racing post Prohibition because the guys that were smuggling took their vehicles and they modified them, hopped them up, souped them up, and that became like the crime police arms race of vehicles. And so once the moonshine running was pretty much over, then it's like, well, we like going and seeing these races, and all that. So that became a popularity too, out of that. So we got some of those things became a little bit more legitimate. But it was probably a good thing that the organized crime going to the wayside, at least in the way it was a good thing. Wasn't there, what was the
Mad Max era.
Mad Max era. There's plenty of old films with gangsters and stuff in them, like Some Like It Hot. There's a scene where the gangsters use the Tommy guns in the back alley. It's an old Marilyn Monroe flick. That era. So it's that stuff became pop culture for a long time, and we still have movies about the gangster era, and we kind of glorify a little bit, but at the same time, it's like, why? It was not good. It wasn't a good thing to. And so having this middle ground where there's some regulation on it is probably a better thing.
Right. And on top of that, taxes, because back then, what was it, 1913 is when because we never used to pay taxes. We used to get all of our revenue from the government from tariffs before then.
If you go and you look at all the most amazing portions of modern American architecture, they come from being paid by tariffs, import taxes. Where do the roads and the schools, the big terminals for the train stations, those massive buildings in DC, our big metro areas with the columns and the Romanesque stuff and the Art Deco, these massive pieces of art came from that, not from taxing us, the people, but taxing people that want to import goods into our country and say, okay, you want a piece of my market? You're going to pay for my market.
Right.
And under Calvin Coolidge, that was one of the best presidents we had in that regard under his economy. He basically did nothing but I think actually income tax existed, and then he got rid of it at one point, and then it came back. Wow. And ever since we got income tax to come back, and also I think 1913 was when the Federal Reserve was instituted as well.
Yep.
So not only did we get, taxed, not only did they start taxing us, they started also... They handed over basically our economic system to a independent third party. It's not federal because it's part of the government. It's federal in name only.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, of course, the Great Depression, on the onset of that, made potential tax revenue from alcohol sales highly attractive to the federal government. So, they needed money at the time. Repealing Prohibition allowed for legal alcohol sales, bringing much revenue that was needed at the time, even though nobody could afford it.
Yeah, that's the Valentine's Day Massacre. That's the one I was trying to think of. I couldn't. Thanks, Biddy.
Yeah, if you guys don't know Elizabeth, she's on co-host with me on Sunset Rants Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. She's my Monday co-host with me, so you should check her out. She does a bunch of music reaction videos on YouTube as well. Yeah. So, so the next portion of this, the third, so I have 5 different sections here. So this will be the third. What relevance did Prohibition have with the federal government and the start leniency with prescription drugs and experimental medical studies? All right. So after Prohibition, the federal government gained more centralized power in regulating substances. The establishment of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, or the FBN, in 1930, marked an early step in consolidating drug enforcement efforts as the government transitioned from alcohol regulation to drug regulation. It began taking a more hands-on role in overseeing both recreational substances and medical drugs.
There you go, Zaza. That's the point you made. Government taking over control. It's like, oh, we're going to make it legal now. Now we're just going to find another way to keep our hands in it.
Or another way just to get more money. So that I think that's what started in 1913 is how do we get money from Americans' pockets into ours?
Hmm.
Because we were a growing country at the time. So let's start off. So there's two different types. So you have prescription drugs, where at the end of Prohibition coincided with the increased leniency towards the development and use of prescription medications. During the 1930s and 1950s, however, many new pharmaceuticals were developed with relatively limited oversight. The Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938 was the first major step in regulating drugs, but still allowed considerable flexibility of medical experimentation. So, not only that, but back in the day, they didn't have doctors' offices. You called a doctor and they came to your house.
Right.
So if you had an issue, they came in with their little leather bag
Yeah.
and they checked you out and they were like, okay, here, take 2 of these and call me in the morning. Like that's what it used to be,
Right.
but
Oh, I
then
never thought about that.
yeah, exactly. But then you go into the second part of this, which is experimental medical studies. So in that era, they also saw a rise of controversial medical studies. One of the most infamous, which you guys already know, the Tuskegee experiment.
Hmm.
I know you know a lot about this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this era also saw a rise of controversial medical studies. One of the most infamous examples with the Tuskegee syphilis study from 1932 to 1972. That's 50 years that they did this. Is it 50? Is it 30, 40, 50, 60, 40 years. Yeah, so 40 years. And so hundreds of African American men were unknowingly left untreated for syphilis in order to study the disease's progression, such as experiments reflected in the era's lack of stringent ethical standards in medical research.
This was done a couple decades before the Nazis did with their experiments on the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
This is horrific. I mean, so let's not say they were the first ones in modern history to experiment on people. Let's just be honest here, okay? Like that's horrific.
Right.
Yep, there you go.
Yeah,
there you go,
there
Bilbo.
it is. Brian had to come in, a resident historian. He knows all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
This guy's good. But then, Prohibition underscored the power of federal regulation over substances, laying the groundwork for later drug laws and government interventions in both recreational and medical contexts. So that's why you'll see, what is it, Scrap, where you have FDA cleared versus FDA approved. We're gonna get into that portion next week on the second episode, and the differences between the two.
Right. I think what that is the FDA, they use their federal powers to be like, well, we need to find out, but we don't want to be the ones to fool around. So we're gonna give somebody else and it's only who we say can do it, and we're gonna and in the FDA and they're able to get kickbacks. The federal government's able to get kickbacks through a lot of their medical research programs, and it's around the not copyright, the patents. Patents and different things on the drugs and the search studies and all of that. They really tightly control those things until and a lot of times that stuff never comes to market. They're just out there feeding people chemicals just to see what happens. So
Right.
Some of them are good. Some of that research is great, but a lot of times, this stuff.
Yeah, so we'll go into part 4, which is how did leniency play a role in overdoses and overuses of prescription and non-prescription drugs in the 50s and 60s? Because, there were people that obviously abused, their ability to have or obtain access to these drugs. But then, of course, some people their bodies just couldn't handle it.
Mm-mm.
And there's a reason why they say, why now, every time you see a commercial and it's like, let's get Paxlovid or something like that. And it's like, side effects may include blah, 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 blah. Like, it's the whole reason why they do that now, because they have to. They have to explain that, hey, you might have one of these side effects while using our prescription drug. because your body is not supposed to have this concoction of minerals and materials going through your body all at once, but it helps solve this problem, but is going to cause a bunch of other ones. So in the 50s and 60s saw an explosion of pharmaceutical drugs in the American market. Tranquilizers, amphetamines, barbiturates became increasingly available, often prescribed with minimal oversight. All right. So amphetamines were or commonly, they're like diet pills almost, in a way, and mood enhancers. This led with a widespread abuse. Pep pills, diet pills. I mean, those are just the household names. But then you got tranquilizers, kind of like Volume. I mean, this is one of the. It looks like a. I don't know if they're trying to prescribe it or if it's like a. What do you call it?
That's an ad.
It's an ad.
It's cursed, but it's an ad.
Look at this. This is
cursed
crazy.
That ad is.
Yeah, Brian's the one that brought in all of these photos and stuff that he found from way back when. Good job, man. This is crazy. But
yes,
this
Rick.
was an actual ad.
Yes, Rick. I remember Jeff Foxworthy's side effects joke from the Blue Collar Comedy Tour. He talks about what happens when Grandma gives him a little pill and he ends up in the backyard all tripping out and talking to Jimi Hendrix. Like the whole bit is great. I remember that. Good call there. Good reference there, Rick.
Yeah, that's hilarious. I believe I have another one here. Let's see. This is from The World Orbits Around Doctors and Psychiatric Tension. So it's another Volume. Like this is like they prescribed Volume back then, where it was just like, okay, well here's a doctor's note.
Mm-hmm. There was something my mom used to talk about. My sad story. My grandma on my mom's side, I've only met her when I was a kid. Completely looped out in the head. Like she would. Last time I think we were ever there at her house, she was freaking out, thinking that the smoke detector was rigged with. I'm losing words tonight. I have only been a little bit into this. It's not that. It's her house was bugged by the feds, is what she thought all the time. But her issue was that she was on early in life on those mama's little helper pills and things, like housewifey kind of like stressed out, and she was on a lot of these medications, and they just kept prescribing her over and over. Eventually, it just tripped her out. Like she got completely. I don't even know what's up with her at this point, which is sad. But the reason most of that separation is because my mom was adopted to another part of the family, and so that part of the family we didn't even know for years. But it's like these drugs we're talking about are what fried my grandma's brain. And so in that way of over prescribing for just, oh, this will get you through, and then it's, oh, we'll give you this one. Yeah, it was. The psych drugs really messed her up.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of some stuff that my great grandmother gave me. I remember I had fallen down, skinned my knee, and it's in that. It's like some pinkish reddish stuff that came in like a Q-tip, and they dipped it in and just put it over, and it healed in like 3 or 4 days. I forgot what that stuff is called. I don't know. Brian might be able to. he might be able to post it in the chat here, try to figure that out. But most importantly, we have to figure out, like, okay, what are the lawmakers supposed to do about this? And we're not thinking about now, with like the opioid epidemic or things like that we're going to talk in a later episode. But, how did the drug usage affect lawmakers in Washington, and what was the result as far as like the 50s and 60s were concerned? Because you had medication all over the place. Volume. You had different dietary supplements. Tuskegee experiment, weed, cocaine.
Well, weed was still illegal on the tax stamps, which got that got ruled unconstitutional in '69, and the thing that was running rampant was LSD and psychedelics. There was nothing controlling the psychedelics at the time.
Yeah, exactly.
That
Oh
was
yeah, like LSD and stuff
and
like
this
that.
is it's so this is the era. Now we're talking about the era of like MK Ultra, mind control experiments, CIA ops, going in and like setting up
MDMA.
MDMA, all of the psychedelics really came in at that point, and there was no regulation. It was way out there, man. It was wide open, guy. Just crazy.
Yeah, no. But in the late 1960s, of course, the increase of both prescription and illicit drug use alarmed policymakers. The hippie counterculture, anti-war protests, the proliferation of drugs like marijuana, LSD, heroin led to concerns about society decay. This eventually culminated into a federal response, which hence the video that you saw at the beginning of the episode. You know, so um, so you had the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act of 1970 that was signed in by President Richard Nixon. This law created the Controlled Substances Act, which established a drug classification system and stricter federal control over both recreational and prescription drugs. And this, I guess, started the war on drugs. All right. So in 1971, Nixon declared drug abuse a public enemy number one, marketing the formal beginning of the war on drugs. He emphasized enforcement and punishment over rehabilitation, setting the tone for future policies that focused on criminalizing drug use, especially with minority communities, which I'm pretty sure you're familiar with. I mean, that definitely hit my community as I was growing up. Because I'll be 40 this year, so I've got a couple of years on you. But
Couple.
Yeah. Oh boy, man. See, spray here. Yeah, it's really nice. But but yeah. So to kind of end this out, it's most important to understand like how this started. And the idea in my head was, well, let's go with Prohibition where they have like a hard stop on something. And why did they bring it back? And try to figure out where the government's mindset is on how to regulate and control these things. Scrap, what do you think? Especially with not just with alcohol, but with prescription drugs and recreational.
Yeah, at the other side story that's going on at the same time up here where we're ending in the 70s, um, the the see George H.W. Bush, you don't think of Bush in that era, but he's CIA director. And he at some point, and I don't think he was immediately CIA director, but he was a part of that organization for a while, and he wanted to open up his own like department within the CIA and do all these other operations. And coincidentally, these laws and this Prevention and Control Act all come in at about the same time. And so the government has this hard stop on things like cocaine, LSD, and all this stuff, and says, all right, it's enough, and we're going to punish anybody that is selling or making or distributing, while at the same time, the CIA on the back ends down in South America during the cocaine wars, which we could do a whole other episode on the cocaine wars, they're actually obtaining their own infrastructure in order to sell and distribute these illicit substances within the USA to fund these pet projects that Congress would not fund. So they went around Congress, did all these things in South America, and set up their own supply system.
Narcos.
Narcos, yeah.
Yeah, Narcos on Netflix.
Yeah. So that's what all this is about. That's what's happening at this point in time. So it's at one point, and all the way through this, there's also these other stories about people who are legitimately trying to do the right thing with these substances like heroin. We kind of skipped over in the notes there. The American Medical Association at one point, it comes in the middle of all of this. Not sure exactly when, but we could probably fill that in the next couple episodes. And their issue with physicians prescribing and using heroin, there were a whole bunch of physicians that were still using heroin as like legitimate, painkiller or as a drug. It doesn't actually kill the pain; it just makes you not care, but it's effective. right, for doing surgeries and whatnot. Other countries around the world, they still use this drug in a clinical form, clean manufactured, not black tar, not all that garbage that's on the street here. They were administering it to people when they were having surgeries, and then they step them off of it. Unlike here in the States, where if you get on some kind of opioid or a codeine of some kind or a morphine, and then you get dope sick because your doctor gave it to you, and you go to your doc and say, hey, I'm dope sick, I think I'm not feeling right about this, they just immediately cut you off, and now you're SOL, you're up creek without a paddle.
And that's why they end up going to actual like illegal drug dealers to get these medications and things, because they feel like, well, they're not helping me out. They know sometimes they even prescribe you the wrong thing and they get you hooked on it.
Well, they have incentives to prescribe these things. So I don't know exactly what's all in the next couple of shows, but I'm pretty sure we can get into more of that corruption for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm going to make sure that everybody, that you guys are able to see kind of like the progression that I'm going through with this, because we did the whole January 6th a couple of months ago and kind of went through like how it started and talked about things beforehand. Then the second episode, we saw the event and then the aftermath and all of the BS that ensued. That's what I do with these episodes, especially with past, present, and future, because I want everyone to understand not just what I'm talking about, but the whole history of where I think it was relevant, where it started, where it was relevant, and where we are after that.
What's your take? You got any final thoughts on this? There's Zaza, like any experiences that you've come across in your life having to do with war on drugs stuff? Just to kind of, you've been a little bit quiet tonight. We've kind of asked you a little bit of things, but I think we've pretty much just kept going down the script. If there's anything at any point we missed, like we're so used to doing this by ourselves, like come on, give us something. We're here.
I'm definitely just sitting here soaking up everything. It's very educational. Mm-hmm. The last time I even thought about Prohibition was when I was like 10 years old. I did a history project.
And your great grandma talked to you about it, right?
No, I did a project on Prohibition, and I remember learning about it, and I'm like, well, okay, they made it illegal, and then they made it legal again. What was really the point? I don't really understand. So when it comes to the whole concept of, like I said before, I just don't think that the government should be trying to force their